Gish Jen was born in Long Island to parents who had emigrated from China in the 1940s. A graduate of Harvard, she dropped out of Stanford Business School to get her MFA in fiction. In other words, your parents' worst nightmare. But we readers are lucky because Gish Jen is a brilliant creator of trenchant, witty novels and stories. There are those writers whose indelible voice you recall the way you recall meeting someone new, and Jen's audacious and incisive novel, The Typical American, announced itself to me that way. It's an American story, she writes of her protagonist Ralph Chang, and goes on, we meet him at 6. He doesn't know where or what America is. This has been the great theme of Gish Jen's work over the last 25 years, exploring exactly what and where America is, not just for recent immigrants or the children of immigrants who are so charmed and repelled and baffled, but for all of us, natives and immigrants of every generation, charmed, repelled, and baffled by our times and our country. The New York Times said of Typical American, no paraphrase could capture the intelligence of Gish Jen's prose, its epigrammatic sweep and swiftness. The author just keeps coming at you line after stunning line. Line after stunning line, Gish Jen has authored 3 other novels, Mona in the Promised Land, The Love Wife, and The World and Town, as well as a book of short fiction, Who's Irish? She has been a Fulbright Fellow, won a Guggenheim, and won the Lannan Literary Award. Her short fiction has been much anthologized, and her story Beginners was chosen by John Updike for the best American short stories of the century. Her latest is a book of essays, Tiger Writing, Art, Culture, and the Interdependent Self, and it was originally delivered for the William E. Massey Senior Lectures in the History of American Civilization at Harvard. Describing it with a reckless abandon that is going to cost AWP a bundle, Junot Diaz said this, Gish Jen is the great American novelist we're always hearing about, and in Tiger Writing, she delivers a profound meditation on the divergent roles that storytelling, art-making, and selfhood. Penetrating, inspired, and yes, indispensable. Ladies and gentlemen, Gish Jen.
Thank you so much. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here. Of course, I feel like after Jess's intro, I might start crying, but that would not do. I'm going to read from my novel, World and Town. I don't know how many of you have had this experience of being in one world when spring from another world pulls on you. That's what happens to my protagonist, Hattie Kong. She is 68 years old. She's a Chinese immigrant, came to the United States in the 1940s when she was in her teens. But she was actually someone who was half American before she came because her mother was an American missionary from Iowa. Her father, on the other hand, was a descendant of Confucius. And as a descendant of Confucius, he had the right to be buried in the Confucian family graveyard. I don't know how many of you have been to China, but there's a town called Qufu, about 2/3 of the way up from Shanghai to Beijing. And there, 2,000 years of Confucian descendants have been buried. It's a very, very beautiful place with very, very old trees. Very, very evocative, very, very magical. And I think it says something about what the 20th century was for China, that Hattie's parents are not buried there, but elsewhere, as you'll hear. And as a result of this, some of Hattie's relatives say they're having bad luck. And so they're sending her emails. I'm going to read 3 short sections from the book today. And the first of them is one of these emails. This is from Hattie's niece, Tina, in Hong Kong, who wants Hattie to move her parents back to Qufu. She says, we write to you because of our daughter, Bobby. You remember her, number 1, went to Andover, then MIT, then Harvard Business School, got a nice job on Wall Street. But now, all of a sudden, she quit that job to live with a drummer. And on top of it, tried to sell the apartment we give to her. Very nice place, Upper East Side, have doorman, everything. She do not care. All she can think about is drum something. We worry. She is our number 1 daughter. How can this happen to our family? We analyze, in particular Johnson. Johnson quite well known for his analysis. But in the end, there's only one thing we can guess. Only we can guess that the Grays, the grandpa and grandma, are not auspicious. The story we always hear about is how Grandpa and Grandma were not buried in Chufu as they like to be. Hogwash, thinks Hattie. Instead, because they died in Taiwan, first uncle buried them in Taiwan. And then when he himself leaving Taiwan, no one left to sweep the grave. He had to move them somewhere else. Mainland still closed, cannot bury them there. So he said, okay, how about Iowa? Never mind that Grandpa never visited Iowa once in his life. First uncle said, at least they go to Iowa together. And of course, when the bone picker opened the graves, looked like the bones are dry. And that is true that if graves are moved, there are these people called bone pickers, so pick the bones out. So first uncle say, you see, if the feng shui no good, the bones are not dry even many years later. He say, I pick a good place the first time, now I pick another good place. Iowa is good. But now the Iowa feng shui not so good as before. Our family faced difficulty again. We hear there's a shopping center moving right next to our grandparents. And that is why our family, our luck not so good. Everything leaking away. Not just our branch, many cousins say it too. Some of them lose money, a lot of money. So now we are thinking, how do you feel about if Grandpa and Grandma should be moved to Chufu, which is their real home? We believe they are lonely in Iowa. No one could sweep grave there. Of course, we understand there is some question whether Grandma can stay in the graveyard in Chufu too. But we feel confident someone can arrange it. Really, you just have to find out who you should pay. After all, Grandpa is still had the name Kong, and who can even see Grandma is a foreign devil anymore? Now she is not even bones, only ashes or pieces, something like that. And by the way, I do not think Confucius ever said a big nose cannot be buried in the family graveyard. He never even thought about that case. Probably he does not even know nose can get so big. Everyone say American people do not take care of their parents' grave, just let the weeds grow all over. Their thinking is different. You know better than anyone the kind of clothes they wear. They think that is normal. Anyway, we have been talking to some other family member. Everyone agrees. Our family, something's wrong. Fallen leaves should return to their roots, right? We should do something. But what do you think? What does Hattie think? If you're near red dye, you will turn red. If you're near black, you'll turn black. Who knows but if she had grown up in Hong Kong, she'd be a superstitious nut too. As it is, though, she just writes that she's sorry, but moving the graves is not an option. Hattie has come to this small New England town to escape the past, but as you can gather from that passage, this past isn't so easy to escape. This next section involves a man named Carter Hatch, who has just retired and has also come to this small town to start over. Hattie knows Carter because she lived with his family when she first came to the United States, and also because she used to work with him in his lab before she became a teacher. They were both neurobiologists, and they often talked about what they were talking about without talking about it. You'll hear Joe referred to in this passage. That's Hattie's husband, who has recently died. But this is back in the lab. Why don't we have three eyes, Carter would wonder sometimes on the phone, or why can't we see behind us, or why can't we see infrared, or why can't we echolocate? To which she would reply, some things are just not given to us. Then he would pause, and well, Hattie would have to admit that there were whole years where she more or less lived for those moments of saying nothing. Even after she married Joe and had Josh, she still heard them. As Joe knew, of course, she had no secrets from Joe. And mostly he would just hold her tighter then, wrapping her in his long arms and kissing her face in a circle. Sometimes, though, he would go out for a walk with the dogs. And once when he asked her what she heard when they made love and she didn't answer, he went on to ask her what she saw and who. And when she didn't answer that either, he went and slept on the couch for a week. Even when he was sick, he would ask her. Groggy, his voice raspy from his breathing tube, he would ask, are you going to look up Carter Hatch when I'm dead? Never mind that she hadn't seen Carter for decades by then. The sicker Joe got, the angrier he got. Not unlike a child separating from his parents, Hattie thought. She understood. And yet still it was hard to hear. Be kind, she would tell him as he slept, please. Give me your kindness to remember, not this. But he could only give what he had. You should have married Carter, he'd say. Why didn't you marry Carter? As if she could have married Carter, when Hattie was too old for Carter, when Hattie was too short for Carter, when Hattie was impossible, when she didn't see where he was coming from, when she didn't see where others were coming from, when she didn't see how things worked, what the world was. Don't you see, Carter would say, don't you see? There was a Nobel laureate next door to the hatchery. That's what they call their lab. Hattie was not nice to him because of his prize. Neither was she nice to his minions when they treated students the way that they had been treated. You forget that you yourself will only be a minion, as you put it, for a while, Carter said. Do not overinvest in this cause. And not every grievance is founded, you know. What's your evidence? And you identify too much with the trod upon. It's an outsider's outlook. But she could not help seeing what she saw. People treated as expendable. They make themselves part of the picture, then just get airbrushed out, she said. Carter shrugged. This is a lab, not an experiment in living. You sound like El Hancho, that's his father. I don't care who I sound like. I mean, you learn not to care either. They had different ideas about integrity. She believed it was something in the person. He thought it was something in the work. Not that there weren't lines you couldn't cross. There were, absolutely. Still, he thought it important to understand where you had leeway. He thought it better to be effective than noble. You're like Meredith, he said once, that's his ex-wife, more interested in how the world judges you than in what it becomes. And it's a kind of vanity. And once you're not on trial. Interesting, she said. It's important to know your position from yourself, he said. Is it? Miss Confucius, enough. She was in training in his lab for now, he would say. When the day came for her to go, she should go. And they hoped, if they played their cards right, maybe come back as an equal someday. If not to the university, then at least to the region. We have to be able to have lunch, she said several times. You must agree to be sure of that. And of course she would promise that she would not have taken either his word or hers too seriously had he not hesitated over his hummus and pita one day and added, thoughtfully and deliberately, I'll help you. If you remember, you mean, she laughed. But he didn't reach for a carrot stick, as she thought that he would. Instead, he looked her square in the eyes and said gently, I'm going to do everything I can. And when she laughed again, he said, Hattie, and don't laugh. To which she replied, I'm just trying not to cry, Carter. And when he'd put his sandwich down and wiped his hand and took her hand for a moment, she accepted it. And when she got a job at a far-off lab, she accepted that too. And when a job opened up in his department, he let her know right away. This is just right, he said. You go away and then you come back. Perfect. But of course, this is a novel. It's not perfect.